Good afternoon or good morning to those of you joining us today. My name is Dr. Dustin Sachs. I'm Chief Technologist, Senior Director of Programs for the Cyber Risk Collaborative, which is our cybersecurity community here for CISOs and senior leaders and security and security departments at organizations. And I'm really excited to be here talking today. Overcoming vulnerabilities with attack surface management in 2025. We want to start off, obviously, by thanking our sponsor, Semperis, and really excited to welcome my panelist today, Alexandra Weaver, who is a senior solutions architect with Semperis. Alexandra, you want to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Yeah, so thank you. Nice to virtually meet everyone. I have been an Active Directory administrator for over 20 years now. I work for Semperis, which is a cybersecurity company that focuses on.
So while Alexandra, there, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Fun internet connectivity issues at home.
Absolutely. So to set the stage, obviously to set the stage about what we're going to be talking about today, when we talk about attack surface management, it's a very wide topic. It's kind of like saying we're going to talk about biology. I mean, you're not getting very specific, but some of the statistics that are out there are really interesting and concerning. There was the Ponemon Institute in their 2024 cyber risk report revealed that 93% of organizations have experienced multiple or repeated attacks due to an unmanaged or unknown attack surface. IBM in their cost of data breach report this year also said that the average cost of a data breach involving unmanaged attack surface is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4.45 million.
And that's the cost you know of, right? Just
and
to
that's
quickly
the cost
interrupt
you know of, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
But, kind of, and the last statistic also, again, from Ponemon, was that 62% of data breaches are traced to vulnerabilities in the third party's attack surface. So it's definitely a big issue. Now, at the same time, though, there are some promising statistics. The Verizon Data Breach Report, again, 68% of organizations now use automated attack surface management tools.
Yes.
And the switch to remote work due to the pandemic really only increased the attack surface complexity by about 37%. So it was not a massive increase.
That's a big percentage, though.
It is a big percentage, but it's not as massive as maybe we thought it was.
That's true. That is true. I call it the anywhere, anytime on any device, right? That's what we're now protecting, right? And the attack surface management, ASM, is a relatively new cybersecurity focus, right? And I think it's important that we're now focusing on that.
Absolutely. So starting off, for those because we have people who are all along the spectrum of experience.
Of course.
Explain for us, when we talk about ASM, when we talk about attack surface management, what are we talking about? What does it mean?
So ASM, the attack surface management, is a discipline within cybersecurity. That sounds a little stringent, if you will. And a lot of us have maybe heard the term, but maybe aren't necessarily implementing it quite yet. But it's definitely a push. We can see it coming up as a predominant force within environments that need to be accepted, because ASM identifies, assesses, and monitors assets, right? So subdomain, shadow IT devices, APIs across the cloud, on-prem, hybrid, all of that. What ultimately it's doing is ASM wants to detect and address potential vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit. So it goes back to common acronyms that we hear, attack vectors or vulnerabilities or indicators of exposure, the IOEs in our environment. We need to be able to identify those across our environment. And now that our environment is not just on-prem, it's, hybrid and fully in the cloud, whatnot, a bunch of different applications, SaaS-based, whatnot, we have to be able to identify our attack vectors, right? That's a big deal. We have to be able to do that in real time. So running, a report or doing an assessment once a year is not enough.
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we have learned over the last couple of years with some of the breaches, Log4j, Move It, et cetera, is that
Yes.
the attack surface can be a lot more complex, a lot deeper, a lot more out of your
Yeah.
control than you might even have thought.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
easy to understand. It's easy to understand that in this remote work environment that we live in, you're now talking about people's home routers and
Yes,
Starbucks and
exactly.
travel. All of that
Exactly.
is easy to understand. But what is really hard to understand, and it's funny because we had a webinar on supply chain resilience yesterday that I moderated, and we were talking about this, which is you may not know, and maybe you do, but you may know about the surface of the attack surface for your third parties, but what you don't know
Right.
is the attack surface for their third parties and their third
Right.
parties and their third parties.
Right.
And when you get,
Yep.
when you look at something like Log4j, where you could be 3, 4, 5 links down the chain, and it's coming back at you, or
Hmm.
SolarWinds, or any of these others
Yes.
that are out there, Move It, where you
Yes.
didn't even realize Move It was being used in a file transfer
Yep.
tool you're using, or that one of your vendors is using. That attack surface can get very complex and very very hard to manage at times.
It can, and that's why I think organizations have to adopt, ASM, the attack surface management, where they have that holistic view, that single pane view into their environment. You want to be able to get a very clear understanding of your attack surface. You also want to be able to get it in real time. We call it find it, fix it fast, right? That's what we need to ultimately be able to do. We want to be able to close those indicators of exposure. And ASM is also at the forefront of building a cohesive strategy for organizations that not only help you map out the attack surfaces, but also gives the ability to organizations to be proactive. And that's a very rare thing. As a former AD administrator of, 20 plus years, I was typically reactive in every department I've worked in and every environment I've worked in. We haven't had the ability to be proactive, but by having
Yeah, by having these challenges, you certainly have to address, and by having a good attack surface management program, you certainly can address all of the concerns that are out there. And you can, I like that you said it was a holistic approach, because I think,
yes,
that it really is a new way of looking at the way you
it,
manage your security program,
it is.
because you have two aspects. I think it's important also to mention we have two aspects of attack surface management that you'll hear people, which is you'll hear about external attack surface management and internal.
Yes,
And the external one, it's really interesting because external attack surface management has been around for a couple of years, but it was maybe
yes,
2 or 3 years that I as a practitioner really started to see people caring about it. What would happen
yes,
is you'd get a
yes.
call. I remember getting calls or emails from vendors of ours or customers of ours going, "Hey, your security scorecard score has dropped below a permissible level.
Mm-hmm.
We want to understand what's going on." And you talk with them and you
Yeah,
explain it and whatever, but you having to take time now to answer questions because of an external scan that is not
yes.
intrusive into our environment, but certainly
No, it
is the
doesn't
way we're
have to
being
be.
viewed by it's the way you're being viewed. I mean, it's think of it as your credit score of your
Right.
company's
Yes,
assets.
that's true.
Then
I like that.
we also talk about the internal attack surface management aspect, which is internal looking out, which for most of us in security, that's the easy one, because that's the one that
Mhm.
you're in the most control over. You can't control how you are perceived from the outside
Mhm.
necessarily, but you can control
Exactly.
how you are on the inside. And I think the other thing that you said that was really important is it's about reducing the time and the speed to
Yes.
and increasing the speed
Yep.
of finding these things because,
Yes.
going back to Verizon data breach report, which I think is probably at this point for security practitioners, the go-to resource when it
Mhm.
comes to things. But this year alone, they pointed out the average time to identify and mitigate an unknown asset is 97 days. I mean, that's 3 months, over 3 months that it
Yeah.
takes when you've got an unknown asset. And it's
Yeah.
not hard to see why. I mean, I remember back to the Move It
Mhm.
breach. We had, we found out about it, and that one we were talking about it yesterday as well. That one was interesting because most of the security professionals found out about it the same time the rest of the world found out about it in the
Yes.
news on a
Yes.
Monday morning
Yes.
going, oh crap.
Yep.
So,
Big time.
but I remember we did an analysis at the organization I was at and said, oh, we don't have any Move It, we're good. And then 3 days later, we found out about some assets somebody had stood
Yeah,
up somewhere that
exactly.
we didn't know
Exactly.
about, that they're like, wait, our FTP is not working. And we go, okay, what's the name of the software you're using?
That's
Oh,
the
we're using
shadow
Move It.
IT.
And it's like,
Right?
seriously?
That's exactly what we're talking about is
Yeah.
we have people anywhere, anytime, and on any device. So you think you aren't using Move It, but I guarantee you someone in your office was using Move It, right?
Yeah,
And we were
exactly.
talking about, attack surface management, ASM. That is really a security first approach, but that has to be an organization's objective top down, right? When we talk about an active directory team or a security team or incident response, really ASM is promoting the cross culture of collaboration between all of these teams. You can see that shift, I think, as well, but it does come top down. It's interesting because it has to be part of a company's culture, right? And even presenting it as a responsibility. So I commonly say, in Active Directory or in security specifically, we have to be right all of the time. They have to be right. Cyber criminal has to be right just once. Now, while that's true, it takes all teams to present that unified front and to keep an environment secure. It isn't just one team or one person's responsibility. That security focus comes from the top down.
Absolutely. So that raises an interesting question, which is, you know, obviously we're talking about this being a holistic approach and a
Hmm.
cultural
Yeah.
approach and a strategic approach. So,
Heck yeah.
we are always talking, and I hear lots of CISOs in the conversations that I'm having with them, where they talk about, well, but we're resource strapped or financially,
Right.
budgetarily
Right.
strapped.
Of course.
How can an organization effectively handle attack surface management, all the elements, vulnerability
Right.
prioritization, all of the things that they need to do? Because it literally, attack surface management means addressing everything in your
It
environment.
is.
How
And
do
it's
you do that
incredibly
in a
overwhelming.
resource constrained environment, though?
Well, so there are some free utilities, and I'm going to do a shameless plug here for Purple Night. It's one of Semperis's products, and it is free, so you can run it, and it gives you a security posture of your environment. So your data is on site, nothing is transferred. You don't even have to be domain admin to run it. So a tool like that can give you a very detailed report of the indicators of exposure in your environment and your score, right? And that aligns with the MITRE or the NIST frameworks. So you can see the categories within AD like GPOs or Kerberos or accounts, what's weak and what you need to fix. So that gives you a path to remediation. It also gives you a great benchmark. So that's a
Yeah,
perfect starting point.
and to make it less of a shameless plug, I will say this, which is, if you've got, if you are, going back to your reference of being, an Active Directory, aficionado, um if you've got Microsoft in your environment, if you're using
Yeah,
Microsoft Defender, rule one should be, do all of our the devices on our network have a Defender
exactly.
agent on them, or some
Exactly.
agent into a tool that will then into our
Right.
asset management system, so that we
Right.
at least know it exists?
Exactly. Exactly. We know people are bringing their own devices. So, we can start at the very basics because it is overwhelming when you look at that attack surface, as in its totality, right? But there are things that we can do as AD administrators or in the security field. I jokingly say we've all been secretly and quietly promoted into security. We can do things. So we can put, privilege access workstation pause in play. We can do just in time administration, just enough administration. We can put MFA. Those are things that we can do, and a lot of that's free until you get to the MFA, and that still can be low cost. You can at least do MFA on your administrator accounts. You can also do password phrases. We know that we want to go passwordless. We're not there yet. We all, fingers crossed, we're going to go to Windows Hello. But until we do, make strong passwords, 32 characters, if you will, but don't require people to change it every 30 days. That's kind of that compromise, right? So there are a lot of options out there that as AD administrators, we can deploy and we should be deploying. You can layer your network, right? You can segment, you do your layered approach, things of that nature.
So I'm going to give those who are listening, the 80 or so people who are here live, the first mark off on their webcast bingo card. What is the role that you know when we talk about all these free tools, all of these tools that are available, what role does AI and automation play in all of this? How can AI and automation maybe help security teams in a positive way address some of these
Oh, for
issues?
sure. Well, I think we've been using AI and machine learning for a long time. It's really nothing new, but what machine learning or AI allows or is allowing for in the security space in a positive way is the ability to fast track behavioral problems, right? Analysis and also attack patterns. It can spot them more quickly, any anomalies in your environment. So those are big deals for us, right? As AD, administrators, I still refer to myself as an AD administrator. We want to be able to spot that fast because we want to reduce our time to fix.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who's spent quite a bit of time as a SOC analyst,
Oh,
the number of
yeah,
alerts that you take in and the amount of
is
fatigue that you
insane.
will hit. I mean, if
Yes.
you just sit there for 15 minutes and you're like, I'm exhausted. This is like
Yep.
there's not enough coffee to keep you going.
No,
So
no, there
AI,
isn't.
ML, all of these automations really help because they can remove
They do.
some of the easy things to do. If I don't have to
Yep.
look at phishing emails
Exactly.
anymore, now I can look
Password
at,
spray
you know,
attacks.
password attacks. If I
Hmm.
can,
Yep.
if I use AI and ML and automation to identify what are really truly legitimate, um, you
Right.
know, impossible travel alerts, like those
Exactly.
things that are easy
Exactly.
for a machine to use rules to identify, then I can focus on the user who clicked, who's downloading malware on
Yep.
their computer, and address that a lot quicker. So
Hopefully so. I mean, it's
yeah,
crazy to think that 75% of attacks start with phishing emails, right? And then
yeah,
now we have the yes scam. Have you heard about that? Where they say Alexandra Weaver and you say yes, and they have your voice saying yes, and that's a
right.
nice little clip. So that's
I
fun,
hadn't heard of that.
right?
I've heard bits and pieces and variations of
Yeah.
that, which is, now with deep fakes and all of that, they're making
Yeah.
some really scary kind of, even just
They're
full
good.
on calling up. I mean, I still
Yep.
remember the one from like a year ago, the woman in South Florida who got a call from supposedly her daughter saying,
Mhm.
Mom, I'm so sorry, please don't hold
That's
this against
awful.
me. I really just need like $5,000. And she wired $5,000 to this
Oh.
account, and
Oh.
it was a malicious attacker, and her daughter was
Yeah.
perfectly fine. Had no idea that this thing had even happened. So,
Right.
those things happen. Plus, just you know the the scams that are happening with help desk, service desk,
Yes. It's
call up and just go,
incredible.
hey, I need to get reset on my computer, and
Yes.
the
Yep.
information that's being asked for is publicly, or easy to get information for an
Those
attacker.
are questions that you do
Yeah,
normally ask, like your forced security questions, right?
yeah,
So the thing about cyber criminals, they are definitely part of our ecosystem. They are unfortunately very smart. And apparently they have also a gift for marketing themselves,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And becoming bigger and better. They're trying to find a way to make money. I swear if they were collectively put together, they could probably solve cancer. Instead, they're doing, malicious activity and causing a great deal of damage. And there's no holds bar. Nothing is off limits. There is no honor among thieves. So we again have to have some sort of focus, identity focus in our environment. So we're really, what we can control is our identity and protecting the identity. And then attack surface management, it gives us that view of looking external versus looking internal, right? So we're now looking at the external path into our environment. And that's also a different approach.
Absolutely.
So
So
it's
what are
definitely
some of
changing.
what yeah, no, absolutely. So what are some of the technologies that are out there that are making the biggest impact, or some of the strategies that are making the biggest impact that, if somebody listening to this webinar is like, I'm trying to kind of put together the list of strategies or technologies I want to implement in 2025
Mm,
to enhance my attack surface management so that this time next year I'm in a much better position. What are
right,
some of the
right.
technologies, some of the strategies that they should be top of the list?
Okay, that's a great question. I think what, as again, as an AD administrator, the only control plane we have in everything going on is that identity. I was just speaking to that a minute ago, so I think I gave you a great lead in there. So the first part of a breach is really a credential stealing, right? That's a login. That's just the threshold they need because they're going to try every door they can, and once they get that password, that's the exact foothold they need to enter your environment. So for me, any software that focuses on securing the identity is going to be a critical must have. I'm also going to want real time monitoring. I want visibility into my environment. And I want to be able to see everything as a domain controller sees it, because that way I'm seeing all my attributes. I'm seeing everything that's replicated in my environment. That's a critical must have for me. As far as the security side of the house on those identities, I think we all know we need to have MFA at this point, and at the very least, we need to have MFA on our admin accounts. We also should have tiered administrative models. Far as third party vendors, though, I would definitely want to know their security processes. We've seen recent breaches of other organizations or companies or products. We want to know what their process is, right, as well, how they work in their environment, how they keep their product safe. Those are questions I don't think we all would have asked maybe 5 years ago. And now we definitely are asking about that. We're including that in our vetting process.
No, absolutely. So, the other question, which is, you know, so we talk about these different technologies, the different strategies to implement.
Hmm.
How should organizations be approaching it, and what should they be thinking about so that they can implement these strategies, especially identity based strategies,
Yeah.
without disrupting operations? Because, you say,
Oh, for
oh, I'm going
sure.
to add in MFA and now I'm going to
Hmm.
slow you down. And then the first response is, well, I can't do that because it's going to take me an extra couple of minutes or whatever.
Okay, and that's a great point. We are going to always have friction with our user base, and it's not because, we know more, we just know something different than them, right? It's because the 32 character password, I mean, no one is going to tell you, "Oh, that's easy and that's fantastic." But we should all be using password vaults at this point. We shouldn't be writing anything down. And if I only require you to change your passwords every 6 months, but yet I require a 32 password, I feel like that's a decent compromise. Now, requiring MFA, I realize there's MFA fatigue. I understand that it's real, but we still have to have that. So, what it comes down to is when I hear people complain, like, well, I have to change my password every 30 days. I will commonly say, well, you just went through a security breach and you had to change all of your passwords and put a credit freeze on your information. So, would changing your password be easier? Because the friction is always going to exist for us to be secure, but it has to be, right? We can reduce the friction, but it's never going to just be seamless. It no longer can be. It has to be conscious at the very minimum. We know that we have to protect, again, we have to protect our identity. We have to have solutions that look at identity first. That's the only control plane we have.
And what's interesting is, and we've talked about this as well on previous webinars that I've been involved in, and even just from my own kind of research and work that I do in behavioral science and cybersecurity. It's interesting because you have people who get very frustrated about the friction, but at the
I
very
know.
at the other end, when you implement passwordless and you take away all the friction, they go, well, this doesn't feel right because I'm not being prompted for anything anymore. So
I
it's like
know. I know.
you can't go any one way on either side of the spectrum without somebody freaking out. So it's, where is that
Yeah.
equilibrium? Where do you find the point where they're like, this is just enough friction to make
Yeah.
me comfortable, but it's
Yeah.
also not enough friction that it's slowing me down?
But that's also where I think the user involvement and the user training needs to come from. I think if users were involved in this process saying, "Hey, look at these attacks. Look at how often we're getting password sprays." And actually showing them like even just a visual lab, a training, a brown bag lunch, I really feel as though making our users a part of our security process is helpful, right? You have some fake email tests to see. We conduct that here at Semperis and see who goes for it, right? And hopefully we don't. But every once in a while, you're tired. And I've had friends that, they're like, oh, wow, a coupon from Costco. And then they realize Costco isn't spelled correctly or something along those lines, right? So we're all susceptible to it, especially when we're tired or excited about a coupon, but we have to remain vigilant. But I think involving all parties and realizing that we all as a collective whole need to participate in security will help reduce that friction.
No, absolutely. So, one of the kind of things that we need to probably spend a little bit of time discussing, though, is you know what I'll call kind of the elephant in the room, which is, yes, uh the digital footprint, the attack surface has expanded
Mhm.
over the last 4 years due to
Yes.
the pandemic, due to a shift
Yep.
to global work, remote work,
Yep.
and that now being kind of almost the expectation of this
Yeah.
work from wherever.
Yep. Yep.
What impact does that really have? How does it contribute to the risk? And what can organizations do to maybe help minimize some of that risk?
Well, I would hope, and I think maybe hope springs eternal, that we're at the point where we're realizing we have to support our users and their home networks. But more importantly, that we, again, as AD administrators, as security folks, have different mechanisms in place to secure our environment, right? We know people are logging in from home, and who knows the last time they updated, their on their end, right? Or they're going into Starbucks. But there's VPNs, right? The strong passwords, the network segmentation, things along those lines can help protect our environment. So those are things that we can do and that we should be doing. I want to say, again, I hope that we're doing that at this point. So that's a
Yeah, no,
little bit.
absolutely.
What else
Absolutely.
are
So
you thinking? I know you're thinking more.
a couple things. First of all, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function and submit them. A question was asked about, is this being recorded? It absolutely is. It will be available later this
Okay.
afternoon on the
Oh,
SC
great.
Media website, so um you can definitely keep an eye on that one,
Mhm.
and go from there. For me, when I think about it, and when I look at, how does it contribute to risk, I think the first thing is it becomes, unfortunately, and this is a tricky thing, because it becomes a little bit more important for us as security practitioners to
Yeah.
educate the less technical members of our organizations on
Right.
some of the basic blocking and tackling at home. You should have
Yep.
AV on every
Right.
one of your
Yep.
computers, regardless of if it's a
Exactly.
personal device. You should be
Exactly.
you should be monitoring to see if any device connects to your Wi-Fi network that you shouldn't have. You should probably
Mhm.
change the default password on your router, which
Router,
was which
please.
is which is a conversation that took me about 10 years with my father-in-law to finally convince him otherwise, because
Yes.
we'd go over to the house and be like, what's the Wi-Fi password? He'd go, look on the back of the router, it's back there. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I know.
um Change your,
I know.
changing the defaults, those types of things
Yes.
that you do at work are the same things you
Yep.
should be doing at home. And it becomes
Yep.
important for us to really educate people on that, and
Exactly.
unfortunately,
Exactly.
in cybersecurity, at times we focus a lot of energy during the month of October about educating everybody about cybersecurity
Yep.
awareness, but we don't do it the rest of the year. So I know
Right.
one of the things that I was fortunate to be able to implement when I was in charge of security awareness and GRC at an organization was every meeting that we had, every meeting, whether it was security or otherwise, the
Hmm.
very first minute was a security awareness message. And it would be something simple like, hey, a new iOS update just came out. Make sure you update your phone. Here's what's in the update that's going to
Hmm.
protect you. Or, hey, you need to have a passcode that is more than just 4 characters,
Yes.
4 numbers,
Exactly. Exactly.
little things
Yep.
like that to remind people, because you should probably in January and February be reminding your employees, if you get an email saying please send us W2 information that
Yep.
doesn't, or you get
Exactly.
anything about W2 or IRS that doesn't come from these email addresses within our company
Yes.
or these official email addresses from the government, you should be
Yes.
worried, you should be concerned. If it's
A hundred
right
percent.
before summer, I mean, this time of year, I would be sending messages saying, hey, if you get a request to purchase gift cards, make sure you know you actually know the person, pick up
Yeah.
the phone, call that person
Yes.
and say, hey, did you send me a request for a gift card? No,
Yep.
one of the things that we do at CRA that I really liked, that I would encourage all organizations to do, is have the senior leaders send to employees their cell phone numbers or whatever numbers they're using as a primary contact number, and say,
Yes.
if you get a text message from a number that is not this number, it's not me. Our
Well,
president, our CEO does that, and it's really
I love
great.
that. I love that you mentioned that. So Mickey Bresman, the CEO of Semperis, just did that recently. So again, that top-down
Yeah,
security approach, he sent out an email saying, I will never text you asking you for money or asking you to do anything right away. I will call you.
yeah.
So just putting
Doug
that out
Manoni
there, that
here at
that isn't the
CRA.
method of
Yeah,
communication, I think is critical.
Doug Manoni here at CRA does the same thing. He'll send
Oh, I
out an
lost
email, go,
audio.
here's my cell phone number. Here's my cell phone number. Put it in your phone. If you get a text message from any number other than
Okay, I
this
can't
claiming to be
hear you. I
me,
don't know. Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I
Yeah.
cannot, I can
Okay.
no longer hear you. Uh-oh, I'm
Oh
gonna
no.
just refresh.
Okay. So yeah, so again, the point of the matter is, make sure, encourage your executives to share the ways that they will communicate with people, to let you know what are the ways that they will. We would send out a message regularly at my last company saying, the CEO, the senior executives will not text you. They're not going to be your text buddies. And it sounds funny, but you do that, and you know that when you send that, or when you see those messages, you'll know that those are not legitimate messages. So, oh, let's see. I think Alexandra, are you able to hear us? I know you.
I am. I just switched,
Okay.
so I'm now on my.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was sharing was the fact that, Doug Manoni, our president CEO here, or our CEO here, sends a message regularly saying, hey, here's my cell phone number, put it in your phone.
Yes.
If you get a text message from anything else claiming to be me, it's not me. We used to
Yes.
send, at my last company, we would send what we thought was a kind of cheeky message, but we would be like this, the senior, it was a Fortune 100 company. So the number of people who had, text message access to the CEO of the company was very minimal. So we sent the CEO is never going to just text you out of the blue. The
Exactly, and I
CEO is
think
never
that's
going to
important.
text you.
Yeah.
you're not that important. I hate to break it to you, kind of the funny. I will forever remember that at my last company, I get a text message from somebody claiming to be the CEO of the company. I'm in charge of security awareness. So first, that was a poor. Obviously, the person didn't do research into who they were sending the message to. They also messaged the CISO about it, which was really interesting as well, because he is text message with the CEO. But it was one of those where I was like, this is the first time I've ever talked to this person. There's no way that the CEO is going to text me for the first time I ever meet the talk to the person, and those things sound trivial, but they're very important for attack surface management. Also remembering that we talk about things like endpoints and what have you, and remembering that even though you've got stuff in the cloud, even though you're using SaaS services, those are all part of your attack surface. Your attack surface is not just physical devices anymore.
Yes. And that's one thing to really remember, is that there is more to this than just saying, I have endpoint detection or I have antivirus. We really have to consider that, with all the cloud-based offering that we have out there, that is scanned as well. Like, what is our visibility into that environment? And also, are we actually monitoring for security in that space? Because so many people are relying on the cloud platforms to bring security, and that is not enough. That's not a good idea.
And I think the other thing, and Rob brings this up in the chat, and I'm going to vary it a little bit, which is this idea that really, we sit here and we talk as security professionals about we're going to move towards zero trust, or we're going to move towards zero trust, we're going to move towards zero trust. We think of it as a technology, and it's we're going to put these certain controls in place, but we should all, from even a human interaction element, have the level of zero trust that we put in play of, is this really like, is this the way this person normally communicates with me? Is this the kind of communication somebody would send me? Is the time of day that I'm getting this communication maybe suspicious? If I'm getting an email, if you normally don't get work messages or urgent work messages on a Saturday, and all of a sudden I get one, I should, not saying that it's not a legitimate message, but you should apply some level of scrutiny, go a little bit farther in your checking of things, because again, your attack surface, it's so hard now in the world we live in to limit your attack surface and say, we're just going to put a good guardrail, good fence around our organization, because you don't have that fence anymore.
Right. For sure.
So, before we move into the question and answer period, and again, people, if you have questions, or those who are attending, if you have questions, please feel free to submit those questions in the question and answer, or even in the chat function, and we'll do our best to get to them. But one of the biggest challenges as well, not only is this idea of not disrupting operations, but just the pure, like, where do I start? Where do I implement? How do I go about implementing this stuff? Does it make sense? Or, is your is the guidance that you typically give to security organizations and security leaders, is it you should start with governance and policy frameworks? Is it you should implement this kind of basic hygiene? What is it that is, that can help overcome those barriers to, I don't know where to start, or it seems
it's overwhelming.
It's going to take me too long to implement all of this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, have that beginning fear of, where to start. It's perhaps, as folks say, you never eat an elephant in one bite, right? So take a step back. And then for me, what I personally have done at different organizations and different environments where I've worked is starting to get a baseline, of my groups, right? And get a handle on really access and permission. So what does that look like? Identifying the tier 0 critical assets, even if you're not monitoring or in charge of domain controllers, you still are most likely responsible for file servers, and you're still going to want to find out who has access and how much access do they have, right? So still looking at attack paths. So reducing permissions or unnecessary permissions, I think, is a big one. Putting in place, tiered administrative models, that's critical. So there's an article, Daniel Petrie, so look him up. But he has a great administrative model and how to set that up. It follows, Microsoft's tiered administrative model, explains how to implement that. So those are really good first steps, right? And then look at things that you can put in play, like the just-in-time administration and just enough administration. So you're putting administrative or granting administrative permissions for just a time period or just for specific work, and it's not a persistent, right? So there's some really basic things that I think administrators can do in their environment to tighten it up, right? Ultimately, it comes down to protecting the keys to your kingdom, right? And then that circles back to that identity, is how can you protect and focus on your identities?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, just real quick, just to kind of circle back so that we can make sure that it's clear on the recording, and if for those who are listening, you mentioned that Simperis has a tool that is freely available that can get an understanding of current gaps. Is that a tool that if they go to the website, they can find that pretty easily?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, it's Purple Night, and it's a free
Okay.
download. What I love about it is you don't have to be a domain admin to run it. You just have to run it as a domain joined system, but that gives you that detailed report of your indicators of exposure within Active Directory, so you can work to mitigate those risks, right? We call it like the low-hanging fruit. But what's funny is to me, or interesting, I should say, not funny, is it's going to tell you some things that you probably didn't even know about your environment, right? Because it is a very detailed report, and it's a one-time read. But what's nice about it is it gives you path to remediation to improve your score, and then you could use that as a baseline, run it a couple months later and see the improvement in your environment. That's the kind of product that you want in place that's able to monitor the indicators of exposure and show you the attack vectors, show you the path to remediation, and most importantly, give you recommendations for fixing them, right? What ultimately you want is that real-time capability or functionality.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions that have come in that I think are really interesting and really good ones to talk about, which is, the first one, which is, we've talked about the fact that attack surface management now includes, and has included third-party supply chain risks and what have you. What are some of the things, some of the ways to address the challenges that come with monitoring third parties or supply chain risk, because either the vendor isn't going to be forthcoming with the information, or what should you as an organization, as we've talked about this as well on other webinars I've been on recently, which is this idea that we do this really great job of third-party risk management at the very outset of a relationship, and then we kind of forget about it. We or we come back, and maybe every year it's hey, are you still using this tool to the business? And they go, yeah, and you go, okay, cool, and then that's it. And we've checked, or hey, we haven't seen any breaches from them, we haven't had any issues, so we'll just continue going on. What are the things that, if you're really truly serious about attack surface management, that you should be doing when it comes to your third parties?
So I think, it's interesting, and it's also challenging now, because what we've allowed for is become, almost essential, right? If you look at even some security vendor software that is running or was running in environments that were granted fairly wide permissions, right, and then had a catastrophic impact to your environment. So you're going to obviously want to know how code is being released. You're going to want to know their internal checks and balances and their processes. At several large organizations where I worked, we always had a dev space. And so products were very well vetted prior to being put into production. I know that's a luxury that not a lot of people have, especially in the small and medium business, right? But what you can do at the bare minimum is still just build an isolated lab, right, in an environment where you can at least get a copy, in a copy exact of, right, your AD environment, an export, if you will, and at least test that product. And then also look at the permissions that it is taking or has or needs, right? Because you can map that out very easily with a couple of different tools. And then look at the products that it needs, and then also find out, does it need access across the boards? You know, as we all know, the Target breach that happened, that was a third-party software, but due to the lack of network segmentation, that vendor had access everywhere, right? And it didn't need to. They were an HVAC vendor. So
Right.
we have to look at where we're granting access. I think what comes into play also is looking at, you know, the attack paths. We're talking about ASM and different software and security vendors. What and how do we manage our tier 0 assets? That's a critical part of this because we have to be able to define them. So if you have your attack paths to those, you can then look at where you're also granting access and take that into consideration with a lot of third-party vendors. But for me, getting back to the question is, I would definitely want to test this in a dev space, and I would want to know the access they're granting, their release cycles, and how their code is interjected or playing in my environment, the access that it needs and has.
Absolutely. And I would also just share that, you know, and I think I mentioned it on a webinar yesterday. This week, we actually just released for the cyber risk within the cyber risk collaboratives, 2 CISO developed tools that I think are really speak to this question. One is really it is a question, you know, it's a shortened questionnaire. As anybody who knows, you know, dealing with third parties or supply chain, the questionnaires at times can be very daunting. Hundreds of questions.
Yes,
This
it
was
is. It is.
we sat down, a group of CISOs and I sat down, and we came up with essentially the 30 most important questions in, you know, the main categories. And the idea was, we only included questions where if the answer is no, that's going to typically be a red flag. So that's a really great questionnaire. It's a starting point. It's not obviously, you know, for your organization, it may vary, but at least these are the questions you absolutely everyone should be asking. The other thing that we created was another resource guide that allows or that talks through what to do, you know, what to do when the third party vendor isn't being transparent. When, if you've asked for this, ask this question, what evidence should you be requesting? And if they don't give you that evidence, what does the decision framework look like? So we've built those tools and resources as part of a larger cloud security resource toolkit. I would encourage anybody who's listening, who's interested in learning more about that. I'm going to put an email address in the chat, but reach out to Tom Ward, who can help get you access to, or talk about how to get access to these tools, because they are really helpful. And, you know, it's about, you know, one of the things that's very important here at the Cyber Risk Collaborative is to make sure that we're not, you're not having to reinvent the wheel.
Right, so, and as part of your RFP, your request for proposal to any sort of, you know, company, you're going to want to make sure you're getting their detailed information on their software. You know, is their traffic encrypted, you know, at rest, all of that kind of stuff that maybe we don't necessarily ask, but we want to dig into, right? How are they, when they say they can back up Active Directory, okay, are they doing any validation that the backups are good? Right? You know, having a backup is obviously not going to do you any good if the data is not usable. So how are they doing any sort of cross checks there? That's really what you want to do. If you can do a POC, you know, proof of concept in an isolated lab to do that testing, that's also critical. So you're going to want to look at that. The other thing I think is important to call out is within your contract, your different service level agreements that you have, what do they have as offerings? That's really important for me. I want to know the support I'm going to get at my worst moment, because that's what counts. It really, like, what's your incident response team look like? Who's on that team? You know, what follow the sun coverage do you have? That type of stuff. For me, the support goes a long way, right? I want that. I also want to have a long-term relationship. It's like, you know, I'm seeing a physical therapist or whatnot. This is now another party in my life. I want to have cadence calls. I want to be able to roadmap with these vendors. That needs to be part of that relationship. I want to know, am I having assistance in upgrading? Am I going to be able to do yearly tabletops or, you know, BCDR, the business continuity disaster recovery plans? I want to know if that's a part of my package. I think those are all really important things. Do they have professional services? Those are the things that I want to know. I also want to know who's on your team, right? I want the best and the brightest, you know, when I call at 2 a.m.
Absolutely. And going back to your purely hypothetical, not anywhere close to reality scenario of the major vendor who has an issue that causes a widespread outage.
Right.
You also want to know where you sit in the queue of companies, because when 100,000 companies have an outage all at the same time, are you number one? Are you number 7? Are you number 999,999? Where are you in the queue?
Well,
is important.
So what's your company's motto? Ours is Force for Good, which I completely stand behind and I really like, because it does make you feel, you know, as a collective whole, a part of fighting cybersecurity. They're criminals. I mean, let's just call them what they are. And it's an amazing thing to be standing against that and helping people, companies remain vigilant. And it really comes down to people, because it's your data out there. Don't think they won't extort you. You know, it's your work computer, but oops, you have someone's wedding photos or you have your personal contacts on there or whatever. They're going to extort that. They're going to use that any way they can to get money.
So the last question before we kind of wrap up here, and this is probably a really good one to kind of end our discussion on, but you know, we talked about attack surface vulnerabilities and attack surface management as being this, you know, large, you know, sometimes daunting thing. How can CISOs and security leaders effectively communicate the risks and aspects and the need for holistic attack surface management to the non-technical stakeholders like the board or the C-suite or the CFO, or, you know, somebody who doesn't maybe live and breathe this the way we do?
And that's totally fair. I think, you know, everyone is skilled in their particular area, right? So for the folks that aren't purely technical, the upper level management, right, that we all report to, that always ask us, how long is this going to take, or are we back up and running? They're most likely concerned with headcount, resource allocation, bless you, and money, right? So how long are we down? So if you can quantify the risk that you have in your environment, so if you have Active Directory, it's targeted 87% of the time, and that's a true number. How often are those risks able to be taken advantage of? 87% of the time. That means you really have to secure AD, right? It's 25 years old. So if you tell your CISO, hey, if we're down 4 hours, it costs me X, that's going to really hit home to them. So I think we all have to do our jobs in presenting data in ways that it's relatable to their world. So if you're talking money to me, outside of how many hours we're down, I don't know what $3 million a minute looks like. I will never know what that looks like, unfortunately. But if you're telling me no one can log in, I know what that looks like. So we have to be able to relate to each other, and we need to be better at being able to relate to each other to press the importance of security. But we have to sit down together.
And I think you make a really valid point. It goes to something that we've talked about increasingly on these webinars, which is the idea of telling the story of security. It's the phrase that I continue to keep using. We don't do a very good job of it. I've
No.
talked about how my last company, the CISO that I worked for, was very big about teaching you need to tell the story of security. And your point is well taken. Again, to use the totally hypothetical scenario that you used earlier, it's one thing to say we're losing, $3 million a minute by not being up and running. It's a whole nother thing to show a picture of a screaming kid in an airport who can't get on a Delta flight
Exactly.
or some airline because because of an outage.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden it becomes very real.
Yes.
It becomes very real when you can say, if you turn on the water spout in your city,
Yes.
that water may be contaminated. Like that all of a sudden really brings it home to people that, hey, you can't trust the water coming out of the tap.
That's why we need to do a better job of telling our stories.
Absolutely.
We, as AD administrators, as security professionals, we have to make this data relatable, right?
Absolutely.
We can no longer count on, transitioning this to, I don't want to say corporate speak, but to the business world, right? That's on us to do. So, our users have to do better, but we have to educate them. The CISOs need to be more security focused, but we need to help them. So we have a role in all of this. There's a responsibility across the board for us to collectively be better.
Absolutely. Well, so we're coming up on our time, and this is again one of those topics we could sit here and talk for hours on.
Yes.
Final thoughts, and then maybe where can people find out more about your organization?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. So, and apologies for all my technical difficulties. Again, I'm Alexandra Weaver. I work at Semperis. I'm a senior solution architect. If you can't find Purple Knight at Semperis's website, we are a force for good. We protect Active Directory. We're the keys to the kingdom. We protect that. Please look me up on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the URL. And it was nice to virtually meet you. So, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with everyone.
Absolutely. And certainly if you want to have fun conversations about how to pronounce the new Microsoft terminology for identity, that's also something I'm sure Alexandra would love to, we had quite a bit of fun talking about that in our prep call. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Wherever you're viewing this at, if you're viewing this after the fact, thank you for watching this. We've got more of these coming up. As I've been saying all week and for the last couple of weeks, we're not slowing down just because it's the end of the year. We're going to have these going on, right up until the end of the calendar year. So thank you all for being here. Please follow SC Media on scworld.com, Cyber Risk Collaborative, cyberriskcollaborative.com. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow us on Twitter or X, whatever. But please continue to come to these. We're continuing to try to bring topics that are relevant and important, and will help you all make better decisions and better understand this crazy world of cybersecurity. So thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your week. Great holiday season. If we don't see you on a future webinar, we will see you in 2025 for more of these. Thank you very much. And thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, Semperis, for sponsoring this as well. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.